Hello, my name is Andre, and this is my exam. So I'm gonna be sharing three things I think it's important that all Americans know about about Chicano studies, and then I will answer the question of whether or not ethnic studies will be needed in 2050 when the white population of the United States is a minority. So the first, one of the most important learning outcomes I have from this class that I think it's important that all Americans know, particularly Americans who live in a predominantly Latino area, is being able to recognize the English dialects of Chicano people as legitimate languages and forms of communication. So one of my favorite readings was How to Tame a Wild Tongue by Gloria Anzaldúa, and she states that Chicano English stands in between two cultures where neither of those two cultures really respects them or admire or recognizes them. She shares with us on one hand that she was called a cultural traitor, that she was ruining the Spanish language by speaking the oppressor's language. But then simultaneously, she had to take speech classes that were aimed at getting rid of her accent. So really not accepted by neither Spanish or English speakers. But this notion of Chicano English being a mutilation of both languages is actually wrong, and I would describe it as an appreciation of both languages. So the article Talking with Mi Gente by Carmen Vaught, she stated that Chicano English is, in fact, a very structured and cohesive dialect that has a lot of complexity. And I have the quote here. She said, "It would be a mistake to characterize complexity as it would be a mistake to characterize Chicano English as learner English, somehow imperfect and non-native. Chicano English is a stable and fully formed dialect, linguistically and structurally equivalent to other dialects of English." Then I would argue that recognizing Chicano English would be not just beneficial for Chicanos because, of course, it would validate and honor their cultural experience, but also beneficial for other Americans. For example, it would give you job opportunities because now you're able to interact with more people. It would create a more inclusive classroom environment if we welcome the students' speech patterns. Then we know that inclusivity is tied to academic success, so it would improve the academic success of Latinos in the United States. It would ensure more people have access to healthcare if we start teaching Chicano English or promoting the use of Chicano English, and that leads to a healthier population. So yeah, that's why I think it's important to learn about the importance and the complexity of Chicano English. As another thing, I think it's important to learn for Americans, and especially American feminists, is about the particular needs of Chicanas and how white feminism doesn't address those needs. It is important to recognize that social movements are imperfect, and that includes the Chicano movement as well. Because while it has brought a lot of progress to the Chicano people in terms of social justice, it has also been intrinsically machista. Um, and in one of the articles, The Foundations of Chicana Feminism by Livia Hirschon, she had an interview with sociologist Alma Garcia, and Alma Garcia stated that misogyny is as equally damaging as racism, and although women were highly active in the Chicano movement from the 1960s, they were still relegated to auxiliary or supportive forces rather than actually being seen as leaders. Then Chicanas.com, which was a website provided in week 4, states that Chicana feminism, it differs from white feminism in the sense that Chicana feminism sees all of the identities of Chicanas, sexuality, gender, race, class, and merges them together, recognizing that they are interlinked struggles and not isolated in bubbles. Alma Garcia, going back to her, she argues that white middle-class feminists don't include, for example, the rights of farm workers or welfare recipients or undocumented women, and this just makes evident that no single movement is perfect, but rather multifaceted. And it is important for us that we continue to revisit those movements, those ideologies, and we refine them to include more people, and we understand how struggles are related to each other instead of being isolated. And finally, something that it's important to share with all Americans is exposing how the media is shaping their perception of Chicanos, and quite frankly, shaping their perception of anyone. This is an issue that goes in multiple directions, and us as Latinos, we can be both victims but also perpetrators of this issue. We might also, our perception of other people might also be influenced by the media. But now, like going back to Chicano specifically, as someone who has lived in Mexico his entire life, I always knew, of course, that the stereotype of the Cholo was wrong, as the lazy Mexican, just like the lazy Mexican. But I never really questioned the intention or motivation behind it until I read Richard Mora article, I think, Objection and the Cinematic Cholo, where he says that the purpose of having a Cholo on screen serves the white majority because now it represents Latinos as hypermasculine, violent criminals, while the white people are represented as heroes who have complexity and development to them, and they're multifaceted and they have subjectivity. So let's say in a movie, if a Cholo kills someone, they did it out of rage, out of being barbaric, like this primitive impulse to kill. While if a white man kills someone, the movie explores the intention behind it, the motivation. Maybe they did it because of social justice. Then the documentary Latinos Beyond the Real, they extend this idea of film into news, and kind of the same happens here. Now it is stated that Latinos have the least is the least represented ethnic group in news, but they also have a disproportionate negative news coverage. And this is where wording becomes important. A Latino commits a murder, but we're not given the reason why. But then a white person commits a murder, and maybe they did it because they were not mentally okay, or they needed help, or it was self-defense. Maybe a Latino stole something, but if a white person did it, they did it to feed their family. They did it because they did it for survival. Like, it's these type of wording that changes our perception of groups of people. And I think it's important that we continue to criticize and evaluate the media we consume for misrepresenting any group of people. So now, let's address the question. Will ethnic studies continue to be needed in 2050 when the white population of the United States becomes the minority? The short answer for this is yes, but I would like to explain the chain of thought that led me to this conclusion. So it is misleading to think that population numbers are equal to political power or wealth distribution. For example, one example of this is when in week 2, we learn about Latino critical theory. And the writer of that article, Octavio Villalpando, he stated that the need for Latino critical theory stemmed from the fact that even though Latinos are the fastest growing ethnic group in the United States, they are still the least well-educated population group in the United States. And he actually cited sources from the 90s, and this is still true today in the 2020s, 30 years after that. So this tells us that population numbers change so much faster than the distribution of power and wealth. It is so much more difficult to change graduation rates of Latinos rather than just their population numbers. So if white people, even if white people represent less than half of the US population, this doesn't mean that the distribution of power and wealth is going to be more even. Right now, the vast majority of the country's politicians are white. Most billionaires are white. Most of the relevant, or like the biggest companies are owned by white people. And this is much harder to change. And this means that the systems of oppression that we are currently living through for Latinos and any other minority in the United States is still most likely going to remain in place. And not only, so that is one reason for why we will need ethnic studies. But the other reason is, and something that the studies such as the article US Latino population projected to soar assume, which is a flaw of these studies, is that members of an ethnic group only have children with other members of that ethnic group. But in reality, if we are going to have more immigrants coming in, suddenly the ethnic complexity of our country is going to increase. We're gonna have now 5 generations of immigrants. Ethnic groups will mix. New ones are gonna arise. Maybe others are gonna start to fade. Latinos, maybe 5th-generation Latinos are gonna stop identifying as Latinos altogether. So this sudden increase in ethnic complexity will give us questions such as, how does one struggle relate to the other? How does the needs of Chicanos in the 1960s differ from the Chicano needs of today? And this is where ethnic studies come and answer those questions. So that is why I think ethnic studies will continue to prevail, even when the white people are the minority in the United States. And this is my exam, and thank you so much.